Welcome. Welcome, everyone who's online, everyone who's here in person. It's Tuesday, so that means that we're going to be having our regular Tuesday tune-in program. That means about half an hour or so of guided meditation. And then I'll give a Dhamma talk. And there will be some time for questions and answers and sharing at the end of that. And I just want to make the announcement that I'll be continuing to offer this regular weekly schedule this week and next week, right through the new year, right up until the retreat that's happening on the 6th and 7th of January. And then after that, there will be some guest teachers who will be showing up. So we'll keep the schedule going right through my January retreat. And you can always have a look at the website and see any changes there or anything happening, any news. But for now, we'll go ahead and get settled in. I think what I'd like to do is just offer a simple breath meditation. So even though it's simple, that doesn't mean it's easy. Sometimes it takes some effort to do this. Those simple meditations take some effort just to apply the mind. So you can begin by just feeling your body on your seat. Sometimes it's helpful to do a little bit of rocking from side to side or from front to back, or moving the head, just loosening up a bit. Allowing the belly to soften so the body can settle. And from that steady base, allowing the spine to come into alignment and bring you into an upright posture as best you can. Sensing that alignment all the way up through the neck and the head. And allowing the muscles of the chest and around the ribs to also soften and relax. And then finding some place in the body where you can feel the sensations of the breath. Maybe it's at the edge of the nostrils or the lip. Maybe the throat or in the chest. The diaphragm, or even all the way down to the abdomen, where the echo of the breath can be felt. Just picking one place. You can rest the mind on the feeling of the in-breath and the out-breath. And you might notice that there is a pause between each part of the breath. And just be present for that pause. Be attentive to it. Allowing all other sensations to just recede into the background and observing the pauses between the breaths. Staying curious about the breath of this moment. Resting the mind on those sensations And when you observe the pauses between the breaths, you might also begin to observe the start of each part of the breath. Start of an inhalation, start of an exhalation. Just receiving, no need to change anything at all. Each time the mind moves away and you notice it, and looking again for that sensation, feeling in the body. Noticing the pause, noticing the beginning, and perhaps the mind resting along the length of the breath, however long or short it is, just riding until you get back to the pause. enjoying that nourishment of the breath, breathing the body. Staying curious about the breath. How is it now? Still aware of those natural moments of stillness in between the flow of each part of the breath. Lovely. That's our meditation practice for tonight. Now we'll move into the Dharma talk. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So each of you is here because at some point you heard about the Dharma, you heard about the teachings. And maybe it was just even a few words or a sentence, or maybe it was some class or something that you ran into, a book. That's often the way. I myself first heard the teachings in a book. But you had some encounter, and then something sparked your interest. Something sparked enough interest that you thought, well, maybe I'd like to hear more. Right? That's what brought you here, actually, tonight. And for me, when I first heard the teaching, I thought there's a kind of intuitive understanding that the teaching is somehow describing reality. It's describing something about what I was experiencing. And I wasn't sure exactly how or what, or whether it even made sense, but there was that knowing that it was saying something about what was real about my life, or what was actually happening in my life, but also something about possibility. There's also some clear sense that something else could unfold, that it wasn't just obvious right in that moment. And then maybe it was that way for you too. Maybe there was some way that it struck a chord about what was really happening for you, or what could be happening for you. And I remember going out to, there's a very small meditation center, and there's a young woman there who is giving meditation instruction, and she said, okay, so now there are these pauses between the breaths, and you could notice the pauses. And I said to her, there are? What? Because I hadn't actually ever noticed that up until that point. And it really just opened my eyes immediately to how much of my actual lived experience I wasn't noticing. I wasn't actually tuned into. So hopefully you all, maybe one of you had that idea, but hopefully you all had a chance to have a look at the pauses between the breaths and see what that was like. But there's very clear teaching in Buddhism about having an encounter with the Dhamma. What does that mean? How does that happen? And there's clear idea that that's a fortunate thing to have happen. And so if we look at the book of the numbered discourses, the Anguttara Nikaya, in the ones, there are many, many lists of things here. And so it says, he starts out with a very simple fact, like having been born a human being, there are fewer human beings than there are of other kinds of beings. So just having been born a human being is a positive, is something that didn't have to be that way, right? Ants outnumber us by a long shot. In the Vihara kitchen already, it's clear that ants outnumber us by a long shot. And so do many other types of beings. So just being a human being and having the opportunity to have the encounter with the Dhamma is a wonderful thing. And so the Buddha, as it's recorded here in these numbered discourses, it says, those beings who are able to hear the Dhamma are more than the ones who haven't been able to hear the Dhamma. And those who are able to understand are fewer than the ones who are not able to understand. And those who examine the meaning are fewer than those who don't examine the meaning, and so on. And so he goes into various descriptions of what might happen, various steps that might happen as you encounter the Dhamma? What would then be the kinds of responses? And so then he says, so one who's inspired with a sense of urgency to strive carefully, to make a careful effort, those two are fewer than the ones who actually don't do that. And so, again, I just want to say the fact that we're here, the fact that we're gathered, the fact that we spent some time observing our breath, some time perhaps noticing when we were not able to or willing to observe the breath. The fact that we're here, I'm talking about the Dhamma, you're listening to the Dhamma, we'll have a chance to chat about it together. All of that is beneficial. And it didn't have to be that way. It is that way because you chose it. Because you chose it. And much of what we hear in the teachings of Buddhism is about meditation. There's a very, very strong emphasis on meditation in the way that we hear about Buddhism here in the States and in large parts of what we call the Western world. And certainly that's a good thing. I would say it just brings some balance to lives that are very, very full of activity oftentimes. And so for that reason, we see a lot of emphasis on it. And can certainly be beneficial. It's certainly a key aspect of the path. But the question for us is, how does that really relate to understanding? How does meditation actually have anything to do with the spiritual path, with a path that is unfolding wisdom? Certainly in the course of 30 minutes of meditation, you had any number of different kinds of experience, right? There's said to be thousands and thousands and thousands of mind moments just in that short period of time. Different perceptions come up, feelings, emotions, sense of the body, the sense of the mind. Maybe sleepiness, all sorts of experiences, right? And so sometimes I think that there can be, though, an idea that that meditation is supposed to somehow lead to a very quiet mind. And that if it doesn't do that, then it's not working. Like quieting the mind is really what the meditation is all about. And that's our expectation of what it will do for us. And if that's not happening, then it's not working, or it's not worth it, or it doesn't live up to its claims. But I think that what we see in many of the early teachings, especially, is that, and in Zen teachings as well, actually, is that simply quieting the mind is not the resolution of dukkha. So this word dukkha means, it's often translated suffering. It means something like a basic, a kind of fundamental unsatisfactoriness. way back when I first encountered Buddhism, I used to think of it as being like existential angst. It's kind of very, very pervasive uneasiness. But we see that simply quieting the mind isn't actually a solution in any way to that spiritual quest, or to that desire perhaps for wisdom or peace. Right? That's not enough. In fact, the Buddha himself experienced that in his life. Right? He learned how to do very, very extremely still, clear, quiet meditations. And then he said, oh, this isn't the end of the path for me. There was more to be done. And so the question is, then what, right? Then what? What was the understanding that led to that unlocking for him and for others? And for others. And so for that, I think we want to look at the statements of folks who have gone that way, who have completely fulfilled the promise of wisdom and the end of suffering. And we're going to do that by looking at a poem from Venerable Terry Sakula. So she was one of the elder nuns of the Buddha's time. She was known for being a fully awakened being. And just to say a little bit about her backstory was that she had been born into a Brahmin family. So at that time in India, there were 4 castes, and she was part of the upper of the 4 castes. And caste meaning social categories. And the Brahmin castes were folks who, the men were understood to be the carriers of spirituality, and they were the ones who took care of various ceremonies and texts related to spirituality within the Indian culture. And then you had folks who had kind of dropped out and become seekers, dropped out of that system and become seekers. But she was from a family of Brahmins. And when she first heard the Dhamma, she says in her poem, she says, I was a householder, I was a lay person, I was living at home when I first heard the Dhamma from a monk, from a person who was a student of the Buddha. So this, I'm using Bhante Sujata's translation, and I'm also probably going to refer to Charles Hallisey's translation as well. There are many different translations. This is from a book called the Therigatha, the verses of the elder women, elder nuns. And in fact, elders. And so she begins by telling us that she first heard the Dhamma when she was a householder. And right away, she saw something in there. She saw the stainless Dhamma. So she saw something about how clear it was, the path to that which never dies. Or Halsey translates that as some eternal state, that she saw some eternal state, but I think that that's taking it a little bit too far. The literal meaning of what's here is more directly met by this something which doesn't actually have decay in it, doesn't have cessation in it. So then she says, so she, and I'm not going to go through in detail the line by line of her poem, but she tells about the fact that she became a nun, and she said, I trained myself peacefully, cultivating the path, and discarded both passion and aversion, or as Halsey translates it, what did Halsey say for this? Gave up excitement and anger. Yeah, ragadosa. Yeah, something like that. I would go with the passion and aversion as a better translation there. Bhante Sujata's translation. So does that mean that she became like a stone? No, it's not. It doesn't mean that. It means that she was no longer pushed and pulled around by those kinds of wanting and not wanting. And even so, then there was another step, and the step involves understanding. So she started to understand the process of birth. And it said that her eye of insight, or so it's sometimes translated as the divine eye, or you could say some folks would say it's the that it was sometimes translated as clairvoyance, but I think that's inaccurate. Actually, it's not like that. But perhaps you could say of seeing the principles that aren't ordinarily visible. That's a little bit of how Halsey translates it. So she moved into a stage. From that peaceful stage, she saw that she needed to move into another stage, which was this stage of beginning to understand the principles that were at work, beginning to understand specifically the karmic principle at work. And in fact, she was named the foremost of all of the awakened women of the Buddha's time in being able to see these principles at work. Sakula Terry. Also in the numbered discourses in the chapter of the ones. And then another step. And then she says, and then I saw formations of the mind. I saw the sankhara, I saw the mental, the sort of volitional, reactive, and volitional mental activity as things that were not my own. That's from the Halsey translation. It's a very good, very, very good, very specific way of looking at this word. Parato, parato. And that they were arisen due to conditions and subject to ceasing, subject to ending, the aspects of the mind, even the things that I think make me, even the choices, even the reactions and the responses. So that is you can see that is a very interesting sequence, right? That she doesn't go directly from a very quiet, peaceful state to something which opens up into wisdom, but that there's this other unfolding that happens, and it has to do with seeing the principles. And so now I'm going to give you a metaphor for this, and I'm kind of on a tear about this particular thing, and it's about making this shift from a materialist view of the world to a view based on the principles. This is one of the fundamental shifts that the Dharma is asking us to make. And what does that mean? So the example that I want to use, the metaphor that I want to use, is this story of Isaac Newton. So some of you have heard me mention this before. So who is Isaac Newton? Isaac Newton he's known as Sir Isaac Newton because he was born in England, and he was somebody who was well educated. And he went to school at Cambridge University. And during a break from Cambridge, because there was the bubonic plague, they all got sent home, right? So there was a pandemic happening in England in the 1600s, and they got sent home from university. The university was shut down. And during that break from university, what did he do? He didn't play a lot of games on his cell phone because that was impossible back then. He was sitting in the orchard of his family home, his parents' home, and an apple fell from the tree. Now, legend has it that the apple actually hit him on the head, but there's no evidence of that in his writings. But he does say the apple fell from the tree, and then he actually thought about, why does the apple fall straight down? Why does it not go sideways? Or why does it not go up? Or why does it not go in some other direction? Okay. So this shift from thinking about the apple in a materialistic way, right? It could be that the apple fell from the tree and he would think, oh, I'm going to eat the apple. Or he would kick the apple. Dang apple hit me on the head. Or he would have some other thought about feeding the apple to somebody else or making pie or whatever it is, right? Some childhood memory about apples or some story he'd heard. No, rather than addressing it from the standpoint of that value to me personally, right, to the self, is this apple something I want, or is this apple something I don't want in my space, in my mouth, in my belly? He shifted to, what is the principle by which this apple comes to be here? How is it that this works? So using exactly the same content, could go in the materialist direction, or it could go toward this examination of the principles. And so I want to suggest that is the same process or the same shift that the Dhamma is asking us to make. That taking this very same life, we, rather than having a materialist view about what happens to us and viewing it through the lens of whether it's beneficial to me or not beneficial to me, or delicious or identifies me or doesn't identify me, or not delicious, or any of those things, that we have a look at our lives through the lens of, how does it work? What is the mechanism that is in play here, that is demonstrated through this mind and body? So then you see that just quieting the mind doesn't actually lead to the opening, the wisdom, the understanding. Why? Because actually that activity itself of the mind is part of that mechanism that you're trying to study. So as my master Sekehara used to say, if you are sitting there trying, to suppress thought, that is actually obstructing your ability to see the mechanism. That's actually sort of forcing yourself in the wrong way. The activity itself of the mind, whether you have a quiet mind or a still mind or a busy mind, the mechanism is the same. But the activity of the mind can show you the mechanism sometimes more clearly, right? This is why in early Buddhism, the forms of meditation are usually divided up into two categories. There's samatha, there's the quieting and the stilling, and then there's vipassana, we usually translate as insight practice. Insight practice requires looking at the activity in order to better see the mechanism. So when we look at the activity of the mind, what we're seeing is the role of consciousness in every single moment of experience. And that then unfolds into various different types of thoughts that happen, various ways that we perceive the world, including the perception of wisdom, including the perception of how those mechanisms work and how the part of the mechanism that leads to suffering can come to an end. So Isaac Newton is famous for many things. He's famous for having written about the principles of gravity and light, the movement of light as particles in particular. Another favorite topic of mine. Another favorite metaphor. So he and those principles later on got incorporated into the work that Einstein did and later kinds of physics that we experience and talk about now. But so he's well known for many things, but one quote that I want to share with you as I close here are my comments this evening is, he said this, he said, "No great discovery was ever made without a bold guess. No great discovery was ever made without a bold guess." And so what I want to ask you is perhaps, maybe, something for you to think about is whether your practice is currently a bold guess. Is it a bold guess toward a discovery of the nature of your mind? Perhaps even just being here is your bold guess for today. What discovery might unfold? Okay, friends, so that is the Dhamma talk for this evening. And as usual, I'm going to go ahead and